Here's something you probably didn't know. In 1883, a small-town newspaper in Nevada reported that miners had discovered a cave containing the mummified remains of red-haired giants, some measuring over 8 feet tall. The story spread like wildfire across America, reprinted in dozens of papers, becoming part of local legend. But here's the twist. When modern researchers tried to track down these remains, they found something fascinating. Not giant skeletons, but evidence of how powerfully our ancestors craved connection to something older, something bigger than themselves. That same yearning, it's still with us today. For the next hour and a half, we're going to take a journey through some of humanity's most enduring mysteries. Not the sensational kind you might expect. We're not here to prove or debunk wild theories. Instead, we're going to do something more interesting. We'll look at why every culture on Earth seems to have stories about giants, what ancient megalithic sites actually tell us when we listen carefully, and most importantly, what all of this reveals about us as humans. This isn't a race. There's no need to hurry. So find a comfortable position, maybe grab some tea or pull up a blanket. We're going to take our time with this, because these stories and the truths hidden within them deserve our patience. The mysteries we'll explore tonight aren't just about the past. They're about understanding how we make sense of the world, how we preserve memory, and what we're willing to believe when faced with the truly extraordinary. Ready? Let's begin. And if you'd like more content like this, a quick like helps others discover it too. You know, we spent time exploring ancient stones, lost coastlines, and the incredible things humans achieved thousands of years ago. We just need to remember what humans are capable of when we work together. But there's one claim that keeps appearing in these discussions. Giant skeletons. Stories of excavations uncovering bones of people 10, 12, even 15 feet tall. Newspaper clippings from the 1800s. Grainy photos. Whispered accounts of museums hiding evidence. It's compelling stuff, isn't it? The idea that there's proof, actual physical proof, locked away somewhere. We're being kept from the truth. So let's talk about it. Honestly, critically, and with the same respect for evidence we've applied to everything else. Here's the thing about extraordinary claims. They require extraordinary evidence. That's not just a catchy phrase, it's the foundation of how we understand reality. If I tell you I had toast for breakfast, you'll probably believe me. Toast exists. People eat it. No big deal. If I tell you I had breakfast with a 10-foot-tall human, you'd want more than my word. You'd want photos, medical documentation, multiple witnesses, physical evidence. That's not being closed-minded. That's being reasonable. Now, let's start with what we know is real. Human gigantism exists. Throughout history, we've documented individuals reaching 7, even 8 feet tall. Robert Wadlow, the tallest person in recorded history, reached 8 feet 11 inches. These are real people with a real medical condition, usually a pituitary gland disorder that causes excessive growth hormone production. But here's what's crucial to understand. These individuals faced serious health challenges. Their skeletons weren't built to support that much height. Joint problems, heart strain, shortened lifespans. The human body has limits, and pushing past 7 or 8 feet comes with significant biological costs. Which brings us to an important question. If 12-foot humans existed, where are their bones? The answer you'll often hear is that they've been hidden, suppressed, locked away in museum basements. But before we accept that explanation, we need to understand something about bones themselves. Normal skeletons rarely survive thousands of years intact. Fossilization is an incredibly rare process. It requires specific conditions, usually rapid burial in sediment, then mineralization over vast periods. Most bones simply decay. They're organic material, and nature breaks them down. That's why complete dinosaur skeletons are museum treasures. They're exceptions, not the rule. Now imagine trying to preserve a skeleton twice the normal size from an individual whose bones were already stressed by supporting excessive weight. The likelihood of preservation drops even further. When someone claims giant skeletons were common, but have all mysteriously disappeared, we're being asked to believe that fragile rare specimens somehow existed in vast numbers, were all found, and were then all hidden away. It's not impossible, but it requires a conspiracy involving thousands of archaeologists, museum curators, and scientists across different countries, different time periods, different political systems, all maintaining perfect silence. Let's consider a simpler explanation. Those 19th century newspaper stories. If you read newspapers from the 1800s, you'll find all sorts of wild claims. Sea serpents, petrified giants, ancient buried cities filled with gold. This was an era of sensationalist journalism, before modern fact-checking standards. Newspapers competed for readers with spectacular stories. The more extraordinary, the better. And here's something fascinating. When modern researchers try to trace these stories back to their sources, they find a pattern. The same tales appear in multiple papers, each reprinting from another with slight variations. Locations change. Details shift. But physical evidence? Museum records? Actual specimens? They don't materialize. This isn't about calling our ancestors liars. It's about understanding the context. Entertainment and news weren't as separate as they are today. A good story was a good story. There's another factor at play here. Confirmation bias. It's part of how human minds work. When we believe something, we remember evidence that supports it and forget evidence that contradicts it. Someone interested in giant bones will remember every ambiguous newspaper clipping, but won't retain the dozens of scientific studies showing normal human variation. So what do physical anthropologists actually find when they examine ancient human remains? They find us, Homo sapiens, with the same range of heights we see today. Some populations were taller on average, some shorter, based on nutrition and genetics, but all within normal human parameters. They find evidence of disease, of injury, of lives lived, and bones that tell stories. Real stories. Human stories. And that's what makes this topic so important. Because when we chase myths of giant skeletons, we're not just pursuing an interesting mystery. We're potentially diverting attention from actual human remains that deserve respect and study. Indigenous communities have fought for decades to have their ancestors' remains returned from museum collections. Real people, real bones, real cultural heritage. We focus on mythical giants. We risk treating actual human remains as props in a story rather than the sacred remnants they are. The truth is this: we have no verified giant skeletons, no authenticated remains of humans beyond the natural range of our species. What we have are stories, ambiguous claims, and a very human desire to believe in something extraordinary. But here's what I find genuinely extraordinary: the real human story. The fact that we evolved from earlier hominins, that we spread across the entire planet using nothing but our intelligence and cooperation. We built Göbekli Tepe and the pyramids and Stonehenge with the same bodies we have today. We don't need to be giants to be remarkable. We already are. Have you ever believed something based on an exciting story, only to later discover the truth was more mundane? Now, the truth is often more mundane than the myth. But here's the thing: the mundane truth carries its own weight. Because when we look at history, at the real documented patterns of how civilizations rise and reach their peak, then stumble and fall, we see something that's both sobering and strangely comforting. We see that it's happened before, many times, and each time there were warnings. Think about civilizational cycles like building maintenance. Stay with me here. You've got a structure, a house, let's say. It's built with care, with solid foundations, good material. For years, it stands strong. But if the people living there don't maintain it, if they ignore the small cracks, if they say, "Hey, that leak in the roof can wait," then eventually that structure fails. Not because it was poorly built originally, but because maintenance was neglected. Now, structures built with long-term integrity in mind, with sustainable principles woven into their very design, those can endure for generations. That's civilization. That's us. The ancient Greeks understood this. They had a word for it, hubris. It meant excessive pride, overconfidence. And in their philosophy, in their plays and stories, hubris always came before the fall. It wasn't mystical prophecy. It was pattern recognition. They'd watched enough empires, enough powerful leaders, to know that when you start believing you're invincible, when you stop questioning your own choices, that's when you're most vulnerable. Take Rome. Not the romantic version, but the real, documented, incredibly complex Roman Empire. At its height, it was a marvel, roads connecting vast territories, aqueducts bringing water to cities, trade networks spanning continents. That complexity, it made the whole system fragile. When one part started failing, it created pressure on another. Economic troubles meant they couldn't pay soldiers. Unpaid soldiers meant border defenses weakened. Weak borders meant invasions. Invasions disrupted trade. Disrupted trade caused economic troubles. You see how that works? It's a cascade. The Romans even wrote about it. They saw it happening. Thinkers and writers at the time were saying, "Hey, we might want to look at this. We might want to change course." But complex systems develop momentum. They're hard to steer. And by the time everyone agreed something needed to change, it was already too late to change it easily. Here's what's truly fascinating. This isn't unique to Rome. We can trace this pattern through Mesopotamian city-states, through Egyptian dynasties, through the Maya in Central America, through the Khmer Empire in Cambodia. Each one reached a peak of sophistication, then faced a combination of environmental stress, internal pressure, and system overload. And each time, the collapse happened faster than the rise. It takes centuries to build a complex civilization. It can unravel in decades. But, and this is crucial, we're not talking about doom and prophecy here. We're talking about observed patterns. Data. The ancient warnings embedded in philosophy and literature weren't supernatural predictions. They were people who'd studied history saying, "This is what happens when societies follow this path." So what are the lessons we can actually apply today? Well, sustainability, for one. And I don't just mean environmental sustainability, though that's certainly part of it. I mean building systems that can maintain themselves, that don't require constant growth to stay stable. Civilizations that collapsed often did so because they built systems that demanded more resources, more expansion, more complexity, to keep functioning. Resilience is another one. The Roman Empire was powerful, but it wasn't resilient. Too much depended on too few things, like those long supply chains, like the integrity of distant borders. Compare that to how some smaller societies survived for thousands of years by keeping things relatively simple, relatively local, with knowledge distributed among the community, rather than concentrated in a few places. Distributed systems. That's the technical term, but it's an old idea. If all your knowledge is in one library, and that library burns, you've lost everything. But if every village has its own keepers of knowledge, its own skills, its own ability to sustain itself, then the larger network can survive even if parts of it fail. The value in studying collapse isn't to make us pessimistic. It's not to predict doom. It's to recognize where our own systems might be fragile, where we might be making the same mistakes that have been made before. Because we're not special. We're not immune. We're humans, building human systems, subject to the same patterns that have played out throughout history. There's something almost comforting in that, isn't it? The idea that our challenges aren't unprecedented, that people have faced system failures before, and some of them found ways through. Some of them built new things on the ruins of the old. Some of them learned from the collapse and built better next time. The question is whether we'll recognize the patterns while there's still time to adjust course, or whether we'll be like those Roman writers, documenting the collapse as it happens, understood but unable to stop it. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it rhymes. And if we listen carefully, we can hear the rhythm. What historical lesson do you think modern society most needs to remember? You know, for centuries, archaeologists had to make a choice: dig or preserve. Every time you excavate a site, you're destroying it, layer by layer. It's like dismantling a building to understand how it was made. Once it's done, it's gone forever. But something's changed. We've entered an era where we can see through the earth itself. Let's talk about LIDAR, light detection and ranging. It's essentially laser vision for the ground. Aircraft fly over dense jungle, shooting millions of laser pulses downward. Most bounce off leaves and branches, but some slip through gaps in the canopy and hit the ground below. The scanner records every bounce, and computers strip away all the vegetation data. What's left is a precise map of the bare earth surface. And that's when the jungle reveals its secrets. In 2016, archaeologists used LIDAR over Guatemala's Petén region. They expected to find a few Maya structures under the rainforest. What they got instead was staggering. An entire civilization appeared on their screens. Not a few buildings. Thousands of structures. Pyramids, palaces, fortifications, raised highways connecting cities, complex irrigation systems, all hidden beneath trees that had grown for centuries. The Maya civilization, it turns out, was far more extensive than anyone imagined. We're talking about millions of people living in interconnected cities. And they'd been there all along, invisible, waiting for us to develop eyes that could see them. Now, this is where things get truly fascinating. This isn't ancient aliens or lost super civilizations. It's just us, humans, building cities, farming land, creating infrastructure. Technology didn't reveal anything that contradicts human capability. It revealed that humans were even more capable than we'd thought. Ground-penetrating radar does something similar, but it works on a different principle. It sends radio waves into the earth. When those waves hit something buried, changes in density, they bounce back. Pattern of returns creates an underground map. You can see walls, roads, foundations, all without moving a single stone. In 2020, archaeologists used this technology on the site of Faleri Novi in Italy, an ancient Roman town. In just 2 days, they mapped the entire city beneath the soil. A complete urban layout appeared. A bath complex, a theater, market buildings, even a network of water pipes. It would have taken decades to excavate all of that. The site remains untouched, preserved for future study. It's like having X-ray vision for archaeology. Satellite imagery has opened up yet another frontier. Modern satellites can detect variations in vegetation growth, soil moisture, and temperature. These subtle differences often mark buried structures. A buried stone wall retains moisture differently than surrounding soil. Plants growing above it behave differently. From space, these patterns become visible. Archaeologists have used this to find Roman roads stretching across deserts, Silk Road caravans buried under sand, and entire agricultural systems from ancient Persia. Places we thought were empty wilderness turn out to have been thriving landscapes, organized by human hands thousands of years ago. But here's what strikes me most about all this. These technologies aren't revealing impossible achievements. They're revealing scale. The sheer extent of human civilization, human organization, human effort. And that's somehow more impressive than any myth. Because, think about it, moving 100-ton stone is extraordinary. But coordinating thousands of people across hundreds of miles, maintaining cities for centuries, building infrastructure that supported millions, That requires something even more remarkable than brute strength. It requires vision, planning, and social cooperation on a massive scale. And we did it. Not aliens. Not giants. Just us. The technology also helps archaeologists work more ethically. Every excavation is destructive. But if you can map a site first, you know exactly where to dig. You can make strategic choices about what to preserve and what to study. Future generations, with even better technology, might learn things from those unexcavated areas that we can't yet detect. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? We're not the end point of human ingenuity. We're just another step in the story. There's a site in Cambodia, near Angkor Wat, that perfectly illustrates this. For years, archaeologists knew about the main temple complex. Impressive, certainly. But LIDAR revealed that Angkor wasn't just a temple. It was the center of a metropolis covering over 1,000 square kilometers. The largest pre-industrial city on Earth. An urban sprawl comparable to modern Los Angeles, complete with suburbs, industrial zones, and an elaborate water management system. Debts. All of it built by humans using Bronze Age technology and a deep understanding of their environment. That's what these technologies keep showing us. Not evidence of lost super-civilizations with anti-gravity devices. Just evidence that we've consistently underestimated our ancestors. Every year brings new discoveries. Another lost city appears under the Amazon canopy. Another network of ancient roads emerges from beneath the desert. Another temple complex reveals itself through satellite patterns. And with each discovery, the pattern becomes clearer. Humans have always been remarkable builders. We've always organized ourselves into complex societies. We've always looked at challenging landscapes and figured out how to thrive in them. The stones were heavy. The mathematics was complex. Coordination was difficult. But it was all human. All achievable with patience, knowledge, and collective effort. So when you hear about LIDAR revealing hidden cities or radar mapping ancient towns, remember what's actually being revealed. Not evidence that our ancestors needed help from above. Evidence that they didn't. We're finding more ancient sites than we ever imagined existed. But nothing that suggests our ancestors were anything other than clever, determined, resourceful humans. Just like us. Only perhaps a bit more patient. If you could use satellite technology to search for any lost archaeological site, what would you look for? Now that we've seen how technology can reveal hidden structures beneath jungle and soil, let's turn to an even more fascinating revelation. One written not in stone or earth, but in something much closer to home. Your DNA. Because here's the thing. We're not entirely Homo sapiens. Not in the pure, simple way you might have imagined. And that's not speculation. That's not myth or legend. That's just science. If you're of European or Asian descent, roughly 2% of your genome comes from Neanderthals. 2%. It doesn't sound like much, does it? But think about what that means. Your ancestors didn't just coexist with another human species. They had children together. Children who survived, thrived, and carried those genes forward through thousands of generations until they reached you. The Neanderthals weren't brutish cavemen grunting around fires. That's Victorian fantasy. They were robust, intelligent, superbly adapted to Ice Age Europe. They created art. They buried their dead with ceremony. They survived in conditions that would kill most of us within days. When modern humans migrated out of Africa and met them, something remarkable happened. We recognized each other as human enough to form families. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? But there's more. Because the Neanderthals aren't the only ghost in your genome. There's another extinct human species whose DNA many of us carry. The Denisovans. Named after a Siberian cave where a single finger bone was discovered. We have so few Denisovan fossils you could fit them all in a shoebox. But we have their DNA. And that DNA tells an extraordinary story. The Denisovans interbred with our ancestors too. People of Melanesian descent carry significant Denisovan DNA. Even more fascinating, that Denisovan DNA gave Tibetans a gene variant that helps them thrive at high altitudes where oxygen is scarce. An adaptation inherited from people who vanished 40,000 years ago still helps their descendants survive today. Think of it this way. The human genome is like a building incorporating materials from several demolished neighbors. When those neighboring structures came down, our ancestors didn't waste anything useful. They salvaged the best materials and integrated them into their own construction. That's not mystical. That's survival. That's adaptation. That's evolution doing what it does best. And here's where it gets really interesting. We're not just talking about a simple family tree with neat branches. This is more like a tangled vine. Genetic analysis suggests there were at least 4 major interbreeding events between modern humans and other human species. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and hints of other ghost lineages we haven't even identified yet. Species we know existed only because their DNA shows up in our genome, but we've never found their bones. Now, this is where things get truly fascinating, because our complex ancestry helps explain something else. Population bottlenecks. Periods in human history when our numbers dropped dramatically. Not from war or plague, but from climate. Volcanic eruptions. Rapid temperature shifts. Times when being able to adapt quickly meant the difference between extinction and survival. About 70,000 years ago, the Tuba supervolcano erupted in Indonesia. It may have reduced the human population to just a few thousand individuals. We nearly vanished. But we survived, partly because our ancestors were adaptable enough to incorporate useful genes from other human species. That Neanderthal DNA you carry, some of it affects your immune system. Genes that help fight off diseases. Genes borrowed from people who'd been living in Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years and had evolved resistance to local pathogens. We survived by being flexible, by adapting, by not being isolated. The Denisovans remain mysterious. We have a finger bone, jawbone, a few teeth. That's it. Everything else we know comes from DNA extracted from cave sediment, from soil where they once lived. Think about that. We can sequence the genome of an entire species from dirt. And what it reveals is astonishing. Denisovans weren't just one group. They were diverse, spread across Asia, adapted to different environments. We're only beginning to understand who they were. Here's what matters. This isn't about giants or gods or beings from the sky. This is about humans. Multiple human species, all intelligent, all capable, all trying to survive in a challenging world. And when they met, they didn't always fight. Sometimes they formed communities, had families, shared knowledge, and in doing so, they created us. The scientific reality of our ancestry is stranger and more wonderful than any myth about fallen angels mating with human women. We really are a fusion of different human lineages. We really do carry the legacy of extinct peoples. But there's nothing supernatural about it. It's evolution. It's adaptation. It's the story of how life perseveres. And honestly, science makes our actual history more interesting than any ancient legend, because these weren't mythical beings. They were people, real people, who loved and struggled and raised children and passed on not just genes, but knowledge, culture, and the stubborn determination to keep going, no matter what. When you look at ancient megalithic sites and wonder who built them, remember this. The builders were us. Humans with Neanderthal genes helping them tolerate cold. Humans with Denisovan genes helping them breathe thin mountain air. Humans who were already a beautiful, complicated mixture of everything that worked. Here's my question for you. Does knowing you carry DNA from extinct human species change how you think about what it means to be human. Now that we've seen how technology can reveal hidden structures beneath jungle and soil, let's turn to an even more fascinating revelation. One written not in stone or earth, but in something much closer to home. Your DNA. Because here's the thing. You're not entirely Homo sapiens. Not in the pure, simple way you might have imagined. And that's not speculation. That's not myth or legend. That's just science. If you're of European or Asian descent, roughly 2% of your genome comes from Neanderthals. 2%. It doesn't sound like much, does it? But think about what that means. Your ancestors didn't just coexist with another human species. They had children together. Children who survived, thrived, and carried those genes forward through thousands of generations until they reached you. Neanderthals weren't brutish cavemen grunting around fires. That's Victorian fantasy. They were robust, intelligent, superbly adapted to Ice Age Europe. They created art. They buried their dead with ceremony. They survived in conditions that would kill most of us within days. And when modern humans migrated out of Africa and met them, something remarkable happened. We recognized each other as human enough to form families. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? But there's more. Because the Neanderthals aren't the only ghost in your genome. There's another extinct human species whose DNA many of us carry. The Denisovans. Named after a Siberian cave where a single finger bone was discovered. We have so few Denisovan fossils you could fit them all in a shoebox. But we have their DNA. And that DNA tells an extraordinary story. The Denisovans interbred with our ancestors too. People of Melanesian descent carry significant Denisovan DNA. Even more fascinating, that Denisovan DNA gave Tibetans a gene variant that helps them thrive at high altitudes where oxygen is scarce. An adaptation inherited from people who vanished 40,000 years ago still helps their descendants survive today. Think of it this way. The human genome is like a building incorporating materials from several demolished neighbors. When those neighboring structures came down, our ancestors didn't waste anything useful. They salvaged the best materials and integrated them into their own construction. That's not mystical. That's survival. That's adaptation. That's evolution doing what it does best. And here's where it gets really interesting. We're not just talking about a simple family tree with neat branches. This is more like a tangled vine. Genetic analysis suggests there were at least 4 major interbreeding events between modern humans and other human species. Neanderthals, Denisovans, hints of other ghost lineages we haven't even identified yet. Species we know existed only because their DNA shows up in our genome, but we've never found their bones. Now, this is where things get truly fascinating. Because our complex ancestry helps explain something else. Population bottlenecks. Periods in human history when our numbers dropped dramatically. Not from war or plague, but from climate. Volcanic eruptions. Rapid temperature shifts. Times when being able to adapt quickly meant the difference between extinction and survival. About 70,000 years ago, the Tuba supervolcano erupted in Indonesia. It may have reduced the human population to just a few thousand individuals. We nearly vanished. But we survived, partly because our ancestors were adaptable enough to incorporate useful genes from other human species. That Neanderthal DNA you carry? Some of it affects your immune system. Genes that help fight off diseases. Genes borrowed from people who'd been living in Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years and had evolved resistance to local pathogens. We survived by being flexible, by adapting, by not being isolated. The Denisovans remain mysterious. We have a finger bone, a jawbone, a few teeth. That's it. Everything else we know comes from DNA extracted from cave sediment, from soil where they once lived. Think about that. We can sequence the genome of an entire species from dirt. And what it reveals is astonishing. Denisovans weren't just one group. They were diverse, spread across Asia, adapted to different environments. We're only beginning to understand who they were. Here's what matters. This isn't about giants or gods or beings from the sky. This is about humans. Multiple human species, all intelligent, all capable, all trying to survive in a challenging world. When they met, they didn't always fight. Sometimes they formed communities, had families, shared knowledge, and in doing so, they created us. The scientific reality of our ancestry is stranger and more wonderful than any myth about fallen angels mating with human women. We really are a fusion of different human lineages. We really do carry the legacy of extinct peoples. But there's nothing supernatural about it. It's evolution. It's adaptation. It's the story of how life perseveres. And, honestly, science makes our actual history more interesting than any ancient legend. Because these weren't mythical beings. They were people. Real people. Who loved and struggled and raised children and passed on, not just genes, but knowledge, culture, and the stubborn determination to keep going, no matter what. When you look at ancient megalithic sites and wonder who built them, remember this. The builders were us. Humans with Neanderthal genes helping them tolerate cold. Humans with Denisovan genes helping them breathe thin mountain air. Humans who were already a beautiful, complicated mixture of everything that worked. So here's my question for you. Does knowing you carry DNA from extinct human species change how you think about what it means to be human? Maybe that's the perfect question to end on. Because in asking it, we're really asking what it means to discover truth while holding on to wonder. And that's where our journey together brings us tonight. See, we've spent this time walking through ancient sites, examining massive stones, diving beneath forgotten coastlines. We've looked at DNA evidence and orbital mechanics, at myths and engineering. And through it all, there's been this thread running underneath everything. Tension between knowing and not knowing. Between answers and questions. Here's what I've come to believe. Mystery isn't the opposite of knowledge. It's actually knowledge's companion. Think about it. When you really understand something deeply, when you truly grasp how complex and beautiful a system is, it opens up more questions, not fewer. Every answer reveals 10 new mysteries waiting just beyond. And that's valuable. That sense of wonder, that feeling of standing before something ancient and thinking, I don't fully understand this yet. That's not a failure. That's the beginning of curiosity. It's what drives archaeologists to spend decades carefully excavating a single site. It's what keeps engineers studying ancient construction methods, testing theories, learning respect for techniques they're still figuring out. The mystery preserves these places too. If we thought we knew everything about Göbekli Tepe or Sacsayhuaman, we might treat them as solved puzzles, finished stories. Because there are still questions, still details that make us scratch our heads and say, how exactly did they do that? We approach them with care, with reverence. We protect them for future researchers who'll have better tools, new perspectives, fresh insights. Now, there's a balance here. And it's important. Because healthy skepticism and genuine wonder can absolutely coexist. You don't need aliens to feel awe standing before the Great Pyramid. You don't need giants to be humbled by Stonehenge's astronomical precision. The truth that human beings, working with Bronze Age tools and generational knowledge, created these places. That's magnificent. That's worthy of wonder all by itself. What these stories reveal about us is perhaps more interesting than any answer about ancient stones. We want to feel connected to something larger, something older. We want to believe that the people who came before us were reaching for the same things we reach for. Understanding, meaning, Dharma, a sense of place in the cosmos. And when we stand before their works, thousands of years later, that connection exists. Not because of supernatural intervention, because of shared humanity. The Nephilim stories, the giant legends, The tales of lost advanced civilizations. They're expressions of that desire. To know that greatness existed before us. To feel part of a larger story. And that's beautiful. It really is. We just don't need the literal truth of the myths to honor what they represent. So when you're standing before ancient stones someday, really standing there, feeling the weight of time in your bones, it's okay not to know everything. It's okay to look at those precisely fitted blocks and think, I'm not entirely sure how they achieved this. Because you're in good company. Engineers study these places and admit the same thing. Archaeologists carefully document what they know and honestly acknowledge what remains uncertain. What we do know is this. Real humans built these places. Humans who loved and laughed and argued and dreamed. Who spent their lives developing skills we've forgotten. Who coordinated massive community efforts because they believed their work mattered. Who watched the stars with patient dedication and carved their observations into stone. Who were, in every way that matters, us. Just living in a different time, with different tools, holding different knowledge. And here's the thing that makes my heart race a little. We're adding our own stones to this long story. Future archaeologists will puzzle over our work someday. They'll ask their own questions about us. They'll have mysteries to solve about how we lived and what we valued. And maybe, just maybe, they'll feel that same sense of connection reaching back through time to touch us. The greatest mysteries often have human solutions we've simply forgotten. Not supernatural ones. Not impossible ones. Human ones. And rediscovering them, piece by piece, through careful study and honest inquiry, that honors both the past and the present. It says that human ingenuity matters. That patience and skill and accumulated knowledge can achieve extraordinary things. That we are capable of more than we often give ourselves credit for. So as you drift off tonight, wherever these thoughts carry you, consider this. The stones are still standing. The stars still wheel overhead in their ancient patterns. The DNA in your cells still carries whispers of extinct human species who loved and lived and contributed to your existence. The seas still rise and fall, as they have for millennia. And somewhere, right now, someone is carefully excavating another piece of our shared past, adding one more genuine answer to our collection, while uncovering 10 new questions. Mystery isn't going anywhere. And neither is the truth. They exist together, like old friends, reminding us that being human means being curious, means wondering, means building and discovering and passing knowledge forward while respecting what came before. And that's beautiful enough, don't you think? Sleep well. You know, if you wander through the ruins of ancient civilizations, let's say you're standing among the weathered stones of Baalbek, or tracing your fingers along the massive blocks at Sacsayhuaman, you'd notice something interesting. Not just the stones themselves, though they're impressive enough. It's the stories. Every culture, it seems, has whispered tales about who came before. About beings who were different. Bigger. More powerful. The Nephilim in biblical texts. The Titans in Greek mythology. The Jotnar in Norse legends. Giants in nearly every corner of human storytelling. Now, this is where things get truly fascinating. These aren't just random fairy tales. They're cultural artifacts. Think of ancient myths like the architectural style of old buildings. They tell us how people thought about structure, purpose, and meaning, even if the specific details have been embellished over time. When a culture carves stories into stone, or passes them down through generations, they're not necessarily documenting events like a modern historian would. They're preserving something deeper. Their worldview, their values, their understanding of power and time, and what came before them. The Nephilim, mentioned briefly in Genesis, are described as the offspring of sons of God and daughters of men, powerful beings who walked the earth before the flood. But here's what's remarkable. This isn't a unique story. It's part of a pattern. Ancient Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki. Greeks told of heroes born from gods and mortals. Norse sagas described unions between different realms of beings. It's almost as if humanity, scattered across continents that wouldn't connect for thousands of years, was trying to answer the same question: where did we come from? And who built what we found? You see, when ancient peoples encountered massive ruins they couldn't explain, structures their own technology couldn't replicate, they needed an answer that made sense within their understanding of the world. Giants must have built this wasn't pseudoscience. It was the best available hypothesis for people without our knowledge of engineering, labor organization, or the passage of deep time. It's actually quite logical. If you found something you couldn't build, and your grandparents couldn't build, then surely it must have been built by beings more powerful than you. That's not foolishness. That's problem solving with the tools available. But what if we looked at it from a different angle? What if these stories about powerful predecessors aren't really about literal giants at all, but about something we all understand, the way time transforms everything it touches? Think about how your own family stories change. Your grandfather, in stories told by your father, becomes a bit larger than life. Stronger, wiser, more capable. Now extend that across 100 generations. The previous civilization, the one that built those impossible temples, they become mythologized. Their very humanity gets magnified through the lens of time until they're no longer just skilled humans. They're something else entirely. This is what scholars mean when they study myths not as historical records, but as windows into ancient worldviews. They're examining the psychology of storytelling, how humans make sense of power and legacy, and the ruins left behind. Why do we turn our ancestors into legends? Because it gives meaning to what they left us. It creates continuity, connection. The difference between literal interpretation and understanding myths as symbolic narratives, it's crucial. When we read about giants, we can appreciate the story for what it reveals. Ancient peoples grappling with their place in time, trying to understand the extraordinary achievements they inherited. Stones were real. The all was real. The explanation, well, that was the best they could do with the information they had. And you know what's beautiful about this? It doesn't diminish the stories. If anything, it makes them more valuable. These myths become precious evidence of how humans have always tried to understand their world. They're not failed history, they're successful mythology. They did exactly what they were meant to do: preserve cultural memory, create shared identity, and pass down a sense of wonder about what came before. Modern scholars approach these texts with respect, but not with blind acceptance. They're reading between the lines, asking, what were these people really experiencing? What were they trying to communicate? The Nephilim stories, for instance, might reflect memories of different human populations encountering each other, groups with different technologies or physical characteristics. Or they might be purely symbolic, representing the idea that humanity's current form is somehow mixed, descended from different origins. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? That we're doing the same thing today. We create narratives to explain what we don't fully understand. We mythologize our own past. Perhaps in another 1,000 years, our descendants will look back at our stories with the same gentle curiosity we now bring to ancient texts. The stones remain. The stories remain. And somewhere between the two lies something valuable, not historical fact necessarily, but something more elusive. Cultural truth. The acknowledgement that we've always wondered about who came before, what they knew, and whether we're worthy of what they left behind. A thoughtful pause. What's your favorite myth or legend from any culture? And what do you think it reveals about the people who told it? Now, while you ponder that question, let's turn our attention to something equally remarkable, something that doesn't require myths or legends to inspire wonder. Let's talk about the simple, beautiful physics of moving mountains. Picture this, a stone block weighing 70 tons. That's roughly the weight of 40 cars stacked together. And somehow, people without cranes, without steel cables, without diesel engines, lifted it, moved it, and placed it precisely where they wanted it. How? Here's where things get truly fascinating. The answer isn't hidden in lost ancient secrets or supernatural intervention. It's actually hidden in plain sight, written in the laws of physics that govern everything around us. Let's start with a lever, arguably humanity's oldest friend. Give me a lever long enough and a place to stand, Archimedes famously said, and I'll move the world. Ancient builders understood this principle intimately. They'd position wooden beams under massive stones, find the right fulcrum point, and suddenly that impossible weight becomes manageable. Not easy, mind you, but manageable. Then there's the humble roller. Take cylindrical logs, place them beneath your stone, and physics does something remarkable. It transforms dragging friction into rolling friction. Difference? Rolling friction is roughly 10 times less resistant than dragging. That 70-ton block? It's still 70 tons, but now you're working with nature instead of against it. And here's something we often forget about ancient peoples. They had time. Not our modern sense of time, measured in quarterly earnings and project deadlines, but generational time. If moving a stone from the quarry to the temple took 3 years, so be it. They weren't in a hurry. They were building for eternity. Modern experimental archaeologists have actually tested these methods. Not in thought experiments or computer simulations, but with real stones, real ropes, real wood. And you know what? They work. Teams of researchers have successfully moved 100-ton blocks using only Bronze Age technology. The techniques are elegant, ingenious, and entirely human. Take Baalbek in Lebanon, home to some of the largest stones ever moved by ancient peoples. The 3 stones of the Trilithon each weigh around 800 tons. That's not a typo, 800 tons. When engineers studied these stones, they didn't throw up their hands and declare it impossible. Instead, they studied the quarry, examined the ramps, analyzed the routes, and they found something beautiful. Evidence of careful planning, of ramps built at specific angles, of channels carved to guide the stones precisely where they needed to go. The secret ingredient? Community coordination. Moving these stones wasn't the work of a single genius or a small team. It required hundreds of people working in perfect synchronization, pulling together on ropes at precisely the right moment, responding to commands, maintaining rhythm. It was a massive cooperative effort, choreographed like a dance. Water transport played a crucial role too. Building a canal to your construction site. Float your stone on a barge. Suddenly, water bears the weight, and you're just providing direction. Ancient Egyptians were masters of this technique, using the Nile's annual floods to move massive blocks to construction sites. But here's the question that should really fascinate us. Why do these achievements seem impossible to us? It's not because they required supernatural help. It's because we've lost the cultural knowledge. We've traded generational expertise for rapid technological advancement. Think about it this way. Imagine trying to reverse engineer a house built by master craftsmen, without any of their tools, without their training, without watching them work. You'd study the joints, the supports, the foundation. Some techniques would be obvious. Others would leave you scratching your head. That confusion doesn't mean the original builders used magic. It means their knowledge was sophisticated in ways you haven't yet rediscovered. That's where we are with ancient construction. We're reverse engineering masterworks. And gradually, piece by piece, we're rediscovering the brilliance of these ancient engineers. Mainstream archaeology and engineering are quite clear on this. The consensus isn't that these structures are mysteries defying explanation. It's that they're testaments to human ingenuity, patience, and cooperation. Every year, we understand more. Every experiment reveals another clever technique our ancestors employed. The real marvel isn't that ancient peoples had access to lost technology or otherworldly assistance. Real marvel is that they achieved so much with seemingly so little. They looked at fundamental physics, levers, inclined planes, friction, buoyancy, and they mastered them absolutely. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? We, with our computers and power tools and engineering degrees, sometimes struggle to replicate what our ancestors accomplished with rope, wood, and stone. Not because they were superhuman, but because they were patient, because they planned across generations, because they understood that some things worth building are worth taking your time to build right. When you see images of Stonehenge, or the pyramids, or Baalbek's massive stones, don't think impossible. Think patient. Think brilliant. Think human. Because that's exactly what they were. Brilliantly, impossibly, wonderfully human. Have you ever tried to recreate something from the past and gained new respect for how it was originally made? That feeling of respect for human ingenuity is profound, isn't it? When you see what we were capable of with simple tools and immense determination, it's awe-inspiring. It also raises a fascinating question. If our ancestors were so brilliant, why did so many of them tell stories about a different group of builders entirely? Why, no matter where you look in the world, do you find stories of giants? From the rocky coasts of Greece to the frozen fjords of Scandinavia, from the deserts of the Middle East to the jungles of the Americas, the stories are there. Legends of immense beings who walked the earth before us, who moved mountains and raised temples. It's so widespread that it's tempting to think it must point to a single shared history. But what if the answer is even more interesting than that? What if it tells us less about a lost race of giants and more about the universal architecture of the human mind? Why every culture has giant stories. This is where we get into the beautiful psychology of myth-making. Humans, it turns out, are natural pattern seekers. We're wired to find meaning in the world around us. And when ancient people faced the same fundamental challenges, the terrifying power of an earthquake, the mystery of a crumbling ruin from a forgotten age, the sheer scale of the natural world, they often arrived at strikingly similar explanations. They told stories. Think about what a giant really represents. It's a perfect metaphor for any force that feels too big for an individual to control. Violent storm that flattens a village? That's the rage of a giant. A powerful, oppressive empire on your borders. Its armies are like giants, marching across the land. Even the achievements of the generations before us can feel impossibly grand. The people who built Ihat must have been giants. It's a way of giving a name and a face to overwhelming power, of making the incomprehensible a little more understandable. We see this pattern play out beautifully in some of the world's most enduring mythologies. The Greek Titans weren't just big people. They were personifications of primordial forces, the untamed violence of the oceans and volcanoes, the raw chaos of the early universe. They had to be defeated by the more human-sized Olympian gods for civilization to begin. Similarly, the Jötnar of Norse mythology weren't simply villains. They represented the harsh, destructive power of nature, the crushing force of ice, and the unforgiving cold of winter, a constant threat to the world of humanity. These aren't historical records. They are profound cultural symbols, stories a people tells itself to make sense of its place in a dangerous and beautiful world. Now, this is where things get truly fascinating, because sometimes the inspiration for these stories was quite literally buried under their feet. Imagine you're a farmer in ancient Greece, thousands of years ago. While plowing your field, your shovel strikes something hard. You dig, and you unearth a bone, a femur that's as long as you are tall. Or you find a skull the size of a boulder, with enormous eye sockets. You've never seen an elephant or a mammoth. You certainly don't know about dinosaurs. What's the most logical conclusion? You've just found the remains of a giant. It's believed that the discovery of immense prehistoric fossils is one of the most powerful and direct sources for many ancient giant legends. The Cyclops of Greek myth, for example, may have been born from interpretations of dwarf elephant skulls found on Mediterranean islands, whose large central nasal cavity looks just like a single eye socket. And then there's a simpler, more personal reason for these stories. It's the very human tendency to make our ancestors larger than life. We all do it, in a way. We tell tales of our great-grandparents' incredible strength or wisdom. Over generations, these stories can grow until the ancestors who founded a village or a nation become mythic figures. Saying we are descended from giants is a powerful way of claiming a special heritage and a deep connection to the land itself. It's a story that builds identity. So when anthropologists and folklorists look at this global tapestry of giant myths, they don't see evidence of a single, physical truth. Instead, they see something far more profound, a testament to the shared ways our minds work. This is where our central analogy comes in. Cultural myths about giants are like different architects in different parts of the world, independently designing buildings with grand, awe-inspiring entrance halls. It's not because they all copied a single blueprint. It's because the impulse to create a sense of wonder, of entering a place of importance, is a universal human idea. Stories are different, but the psychological blueprint is the same. These tales aren't failed history. They are successful psychology. They are windows into how our ancestors saw the world, its dangers, its wonders, and their own small but significant place within it all. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? That the greatest stories might not be about what literally happened, but about what it has always felt like to be human. This brings us to a really interesting question, and I'd love to know what you think. Do you think myths tell us more about human psychology or about actual historical events? It's a fascinating question, and in a way, the answer is both. Myths often reflect our shared psychology, our deepest questions about where we came from. But sometimes, they seem to hint at a history that feels almost too grand to be real. While myths are stories that can change over time, some puzzles are carved in stone, waiting for us to touch them. And this is where we move from stories to structures, to the megalithic puzzles that we can actually walk among today. When we stand before these incredible sights, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. The sheer scale can make them seem impossible, the work of something more than human. But what if we looked at them differently? Studying these ancient places is a lot like examining a beautifully crafted old building. You can admire the incredible skill, the sheer effort, while also understanding that it was skilled people with time and knowledge who built it, foundation stone by foundation stone. It doesn't diminish the wonder. In fact, it makes it even more profound. Let's start with a site that completely rewrote our understanding of the ancient world, Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey. For the longest time, we thought that humans first settled down to farm, then formed villages, and only then, with all that stability, did they build complex temples and monuments. It seemed logical. Göbekli Tepe proved that logic wrong. Dated to around 11,500 years ago, it's a vast, sophisticated temple complex built by people who were still hunter-gatherers. They hadn't invented pottery. They hadn't domesticated animals. They hadn't yet started farming. But somehow, they organized themselves to quarry, transport, and intricately carve massive T-shaped pillars weighing many tons. This tells us something incredible. It shows that the human drive to create shared meaning, to build something for a communal purpose, came before the settled life of agriculture. It wasn't aliens or a lost super civilization. It was us, proving we were capable of large-scale, complex, cooperative projects thousands of years earlier than we ever imagined. And this human ingenuity wasn't limited to just organizing big projects. It extended to craftsmanship of almost unbelievable precision. Think of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, with its massive irregular stones fitting together like a perfect jigsaw puzzle. It's famous for walls where you can't even slide a piece of paper between the stones. How was it done? The theories that get the most attention often involve lost technologies or mysterious powers. But the most likely answer, supported by archaeology, is both simpler and, in its own way, more awe-inspiring. It was about patience. The technique likely involved placing a new rough-cut stone on top of the one below it, tracing the exact contour of the bottom stone onto the new one, and then painstakingly chipping and grinding it down until it was a perfect match. Then you do it again and again for decades. It wasn't a lost secret. It was a lost sense of time. We, in our fast-paced world, find it hard to imagine a project that might take generations to complete. But for the builders, it was a testament to their dedication, their community, and their skill. But the genius wasn't just in what you can see. It was also in what you could hear. Many ancient structures, from the Hypogeum in Malta to chambers within Newgrange in Ireland, have remarkable acoustic properties. Certain sounds and frequencies are amplified, creating resonant effects that can be deeply moving. This wasn't an accident. Ancient people were masters of their materials. They understood how sound behaved through observation, through trial and error over countless generations. It was intentional design, born from a deep practical knowledge of the world around them. Now, this is where it's really important to be honest. Does mainstream archaeology have an answer for every single question about these sites? Of course not. There are genuine mysteries. We don't know the exact rituals performed at Göbekli Tepe. We haven't found every tool used at Sacsayhuaman. But this is the beauty of honest scholarship. Admitting a gap in our knowledge isn't a failure. It's an invitation to keep looking, to keep learning. It's not a license to fill that gap with the most extraordinary claim we can think of. Jumping to supernatural conclusions, in a way, does a disservice to the very people we're trying to understand. It ignores their real, tangible genius. Each new discovery, each careful excavation, helps us better understand their capabilities, and time and again, we find those capabilities firmly within human limits, just limits that were pushed further than we once thought possible. The truth is magnificent enough. Real human beings, with brilliant minds, incredible patience, and a powerful sense of community, achieved these extraordinary things. They left us a legacy not of impossible magic, but of human potential. It really makes you think, doesn't it? What ancient site would you most like to visit in person, and what questions would you ask the archaeologists working there? It's a great question to ponder, which site you'd visit. But what if some of the most important sites, the oldest coastal towns and settlements, are places we can never walk through? What if they're hidden beneath the waves? This isn't speculation. It's a geological fact. At the end of the last ice age, as the world's massive glaciers melted, the oceans rose. And they didn't just rise a little. They rose by about 120 meters. That's nearly 400 feet. A staggering amount. This means that vast areas of land that were once coastal plains, home to our ancestors for thousands of years, were slowly, relentlessly submerged. This is where the story of humanity gets a little blurry, and where we have to tread very carefully. Exploring these lost lands is incredibly difficult. Underwater archaeology is a lot like inspecting a building's foundation after it's been flooded for decades. Some features you find are clearly artificial, no doubt about it. But others are ambiguous, worn down by time and water. Rushing to conclusions doesn't help anyone understand what's really down there. We know for a fact that there are real, proven ancient settlements beneath the waves. The perfect example is a site called Pavlopetri, off the coast of southern Greece. It's the oldest known submerged city in the world. And when you look at the underwater surveys, it's unmistakable. You can see streets, courtyards, buildings, and even tombs. It's a complete Bronze Age town, pristinely preserved. There's no debate, no controversy. It's simply there, a ghost of a world, lost to the rising tide. But finding a site as clear as Pavlopetri is incredibly rare. And that brings us to one of the biggest challenges for marine archaeologists: telling the difference between a wall built by a person and a rock formation carved by nature. Over thousands of years, water, currents, and geological forces can do strange things. They can fracture rock along perfectly straight lines and create step-like patterns that look astonishingly artificial. It takes a trained eye and a lot of careful scientific analysis to tell them apart. Now, This is where things get truly fascinating and also very complex. You've probably seen pictures of the Yonaguni Monument, a massive underwater rock formation off the coast of Japan. It has these incredible features: huge, flat terraces, sharp 90-degree angles, and what look like giant steps. At first glance, it seems impossible that it could be natural. It just looks like a sunken pyramid or a grand plaza. And yet, most marine geologists and archaeologists remain very cautious. They point out that the type of sandstone in that area naturally breaks along clean, straight plains when it's under tectonic stress, and it's a very seismically active region. Steps and terraces could be the result of completely natural processes. This doesn't mean it's definitively not artificial, but it does mean there's a very plausible natural explanation. That's why science demands more evidence before making such an extraordinary claim. We have to be sure we aren't just seeing what we want them to see in the shapes below. So you have a spectrum. On one end, you have Pavlopetri, a definite, proven city. On the other, you have compelling but ambiguous sites like Yonaguni. What we've genuinely lost to the rising seas is immense. Entire coastlines, entire ecosystems where humans thrive. But we have to be careful not to populate that lost world with every strange-looking rock we find. The real story of what's down there is exciting enough without needing to rush to judgment. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? That there are entire chapters of the human story that we can't read, because they're written on a drowned landscape. The silence of those places is a powerful reminder of how much our world has changed, and how much is still left to discover. It also brings up a very modern challenge. How do you think coastal communities should preserve underwater archaeological sites for future study? It's a question that reminds us just how much knowledge can be lost to time. But what's truly fascinating is that some ancient knowledge wasn't lost at all. It was written in a language that can't be erased or washed away. It was carved directly into stone, waiting patiently for us to learn how to read it again. We often think of science as a modern invention, something born in labs with white coats and complex equipment. But what if the first-rate scientific endeavors weren't in a lab at all, but out under the vast open sky? What if the world's oldest observatories weren't buildings with giant domes, but circles of stone and earthen mounds? This is the world of archaeoastronomy, the study of how ancient peoples understood and used the sky. And when you start to look, you see it everywhere. Think of Stonehenge. We all know the image of the sun rising perfectly between its stones on the summer solstice. Consider Newgrange in Ireland, a tomb even older than the pyramids. For a few days around the winter solstice, a narrow beam of sunlight penetrates a small opening and illuminates the central chamber for just 17 minutes. It's an incredible, intentional act of engineering and observation. In Mexico, the Great Pyramid of Chichen Itza is designed so that on the equinoxes, the play of light and shadow creates the illusion of a massive serpent slithering down its staircase. These aren't happy accidents. They are deliberate, precise alignments that took immense knowledge to achieve. But why did they go to all this trouble? The answer is beautifully practical. For ancient cultures, the sky wasn't just something to gaze at and wonder. It was a clock, a calendar, and a map, all rolled into one. Tracking the sun's path told you when to plant your crops and when to harvest them. Following the stars allowed sailors to navigate vast, featureless oceans. The predictable cycles of the moon and sun were the foundation of their calendars, which in turn were the foundation of their societies, helping them organize festivals, rituals, and their entire communal life. The sky brought order to their world. Now, this is where things get truly humbling. They did all of this without telescopes, without computers, without any of the tools we consider essential. So how did they achieve such precision? They had two things we often lack: patience and time. Imagine generations of observers, night after night, year after year, meticulously tracking the movements of the stars. They would use simple tools, sticks, strings, and fixed points on the horizon to make careful notes. This knowledge wasn't discovered in a single lifetime. It was a legacy, passed down from one generation to the next, refined and perfected over centuries. They weren't just building monuments. They were building libraries of celestial knowledge. Let's take one of the most famous examples, the Great Pyramid of Giza. It is aligned to the four cardinal directions with an accuracy that is, frankly, astounding. For decades, people have wondered how this was possible. But we don't need to invent lost technologies or alien intervention. Archaeologists and engineers have shown how it could have been done using known Egyptian astronomical techniques. By observing the rising and setting of a specific star and bisecting the angle, or by tracking the shadow of a vertical pole or gnomon throughout the day to find a perfect east-west line, they could achieve this incredible precision. It wasn't easy. It required immense skill and care. But it was entirely human. This brings us back to our central idea. These astronomical alignments are like building a house with windows perfectly positioned to maximize the winter sunlight. It doesn't require some secret, forgotten magic. It requires knowledge, careful planning, and a deep understanding of your environment. It's a testament not to supernatural powers, but to the brilliant, focused power of human ingenuity. What archaeoastronomy teaches us is that ancient peoples had a profoundly different relationship with the cosmos than we do. For them, the movements of the heavens weren't an abstract science. They were woven into the very fabric of their existence. Their knowledge systems were practical, spiritual, and scientific all at once. By studying these stone calendars, we're not just learning about astronomy, we're learning about a worldview that saw humanity as an active participant in the great predictable dance of the universe. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? It makes you wonder about our own connection to the night sky, now so often hidden by city lights. Have you ever tried to observe the night sky consistently enough to notice patterns? What surprised you? That long, patient observation you practice when watching the stars. It's a skill that helps us understand more than just celestial bodies. It helps us see the grand, slow cycles right here on Earth. Because, just like stars, civilizations have a life cycle. They are born, they shine brightly, and sometimes they fall. And the stories left behind in the ruins aren't always about giants or gods, but about something far more familiar, fragility. No height gone. Now, this is where things get truly fascinating. Around 1200 BCE, the world was incredibly interconnected. The Bronze Age was in full swing, with powerful empires in the Near East, Egypt, and the Mediterranean trading, communicating, and thriving. It was a complex, globalized system. And then, in the space of just a few generations, it all came crashing down. Cities were burned, empires vanished, literacy plummeted, and entire cultures disappeared. For centuries, historians just called it the Bronze Age collapse. It wasn't one single event. It was a cascade. Think of it like our central analogy for this journey, a building's progressive failure. It's not just one crack in a wall. It's a prolonged drought causing crop failure, which leads to famine and unrest. That unrest pushes entire populations to migrate, what historians often call the sea peoples, disrupting trade routes. When trade routes are cut, the flow of essential goods like tin, needed to make bronze, stops. Suddenly, the system's load-bearing walls all begin to fail at once, and the entire structure collapses. It's a stark reminder that complexity can also create profound vulnerability. And this pattern isn't new. If we look even deeper into the past, we find the Younger Dryas period, about 12,800 years ago. This wasn't a slow change. It was a sudden and dramatic return to near Ice Age conditions that lasted for over 1,000 years. This is a scientifically documented climate event that would have put immense pressure on early human populations, showing how deeply our story has always been tied to the stability of our environment. But what's truly haunting about these collapses isn't just the loss of life or the crumbling of cities. It's the loss of knowledge. When Rome fell, The formula for their incredible, long-lasting concrete was lost for over 1,000 years. We're only just rediscovering its secrets now. It wasn't that the knowledge was magically erased. The generations of engineers and craftsmen who held that practical wisdom simply vanished. The unmaintained aqueducts weren't just a loss of infrastructure. They represented the evaporation of the knowledge needed to build and repair them. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? The core lesson here isn't that these civilizations lack some secret, advanced technology. It's that they, and we, can forget. The archaeological dark ages that follow these collapses teach us that knowledge isn't a permanent possession. It's a living thing that requires constant care and transmission. It shows us the vital importance of building resilient, distributed systems so that if one part of our global building fails, the entire structure doesn't come down with it. This brings the lesson directly to our doorstep. It asks us to look at our own world and consider our role in it. These ancient stories of collapse suggest that the most critical failure is forgetting our responsibility as custodians. We're not owners of this world, here to do with it as we please. We are temporary caretakers, entrusted with its health and stability for those who will come after us. It's about choosing sustainable paths over convenient ones, and remembering that every generation has a duty to tend to the foundations they inherited. To leave behind a shelter, not a ruin. Which leads me to a question for you to reflect on. What aspect of modern knowledge do you think would be hardest to preserve if our digital systems failed? Looking around at the world today, what responsibility do you feel we have to future generations in how we live our lives? Perhaps we store our most important knowledge in the wrong places. We trust hard drives that fail, servers that crash, digital files that become unreadable when formats change. But long before we built computers, humans developed another system entirely. One that could preserve accurate information not for decades, but for millennia. Through nothing more than carefully structured stories, passed from one generation to the next. And here's what's remarkable. It actually worked. Consider the Aboriginal peoples of Australia. For over 60,000 years, they've maintained continuous cultural traditions on that continent. That's not a guess. We can verify it archaeologically. And within those traditions are stories. Stories about coastlines that no longer exist. About islands that vanished beneath the waves. About places to fish and hunt that are now underwater. For a long time, Western scientists dismissed these as mythology, fanciful tales with no basis in reality. But then something interesting happened. Geologists started mapping ancient sea levels, and they discovered something extraordinary. Those Aboriginal stories weren't mythology at all. They were describing real coastlines from over 10,000 years ago. Places that existed when sea levels were lower. Places that were submerged when the ice sheets melted. The stories were accurate, preserved across 400 generations through nothing but careful retelling. Now, this is where things get truly fascinating. Because we're not talking about vague flood legends here. These are specific, geographic details. Names of bays that are now 20 meters underwater. Descriptions of land bridges between islands. Routes people used to walk that are now open ocean. And when researchers compare these oral traditions to geological data, they match. The stories describe a world that genuinely existed thousands of years before writing was invented. So how does this work? How do you keep information accurate for 10,000 years without writing it down? The answer lies in structure. Oral cultures don't just tell stories casually. They develop sophisticated techniques to preserve accuracy. Stories are tied to songs. Songs are tied to specific rhythms and melodies. Those rhythms make them easier to remember. The stories are performed regularly, creating multiple checkpoints. Elders correct mistakes. Young people learn through repetition. And crucially, the stories serve practical purposes. They're not just entertainment. They're maps, survival guides, legal records. That practicality creates strong selection pressure for accuracy. But Here's the key distinction we need to make. Oral traditions preserve genuine cultural knowledge. They contain real information about geography, ecology, social history. That doesn't mean we should read them as literal historical documents in the modern sense, because oral traditions also evolve. They incorporate metaphor. They use symbolism to encode complex ideas. The great-grandfather who built the family home becomes larger than life in the retelling. His accomplishments get embellished, but the core truth remains. Someone built something significant here, and that matters. Think about flood myths for a moment. Nearly every culture has them, from the biblical flood to the Epic of Gilgamesh, from Greek mythology to stories from indigenous peoples across the Pacific. For centuries, people argued about whether these pointed to a single global flood, some supernatural event. But what if we looked at it from a different angle? Know that sea levels rose dramatically after the last ice age. 120 meters. That's a 40-story building. Coastal communities worldwide would have experienced catastrophic flooding as ocean levels rose. Not all at once, but over centuries, places people lived became uninhabitable. Islands vanished. River valleys flooded. For coastal peoples, this was their apocalypse, and they remembered it. Each culture preserved its own experience of rising waters through stories that made sense within their worldview. These aren't supernatural revelations. They're memories, transformed through the lens of myth-making, yes, but rooted in real events that people actually witnessed. And increasingly, archaeologists are taking these traditions seriously, not as magical prophecies, but as complementary sources of information. When indigenous peoples in the Pacific say their ancestors came from islands that no longer exist, researchers look for submerged archaeological sites. And sometimes, they find them. When Native American oral histories describe massive floods in the Pacific Northwest, geologists discover evidence of ancient megafloods. The stories point toward real events. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? These knowledge systems we dismissed as primitive were preserving accurate information across timescales we can barely imagine. While empires rose and fell, while entire civilizations disappeared, the stories continued, passed from elder to child, generation after generation, surviving because they were useful, because they were true. Does your family have any stories passed down through generations? How accurate do you think they are? Maybe your grandmother tells you about the old neighborhood, how it looked before the highway came through. Your great-grandfather's journey from another country. The family business that no longer exists. These stories carry truth, but they also carry mythology. Your great-grandfather becomes braver in each retelling. The old neighborhood becomes more vibrant. The family business more prosperous. The details shift, but something essential remains. These things happened. These people existed. This is where we came from. That's what oral traditions are. They're not supernatural transmissions of perfect information. They're human memory, structured and preserved through cultural techniques we're only beginning to appreciate. And when we approach them with respect, when we test them against other evidence, they can teach us extraordinary things about the depth of human experience on this planet. As you settle in tonight, consider this. The stories we tell matter, not just for what they say about the past, but for what they preserve for the future. Every generation is a link in a chain, stretching back further than we can imagine, and forward to places we'll never see. Every generation is a link in a chain stretching back further than we can imagine, and forward to places we'll never see. But here's the beautiful thing about that chain. We can test it. We can pull on it. We can see if it holds. That's what experimental archaeologists do. They don't just theorize about how ancient peoples moved massive stones or built incredible structures. They actually try to do it themselves, with the same tools, The same materials. The same human limitations. And you know what? It works. Now, this is where things get truly fascinating. In the 1990s, a team led by engineer Mark Whitby successfully moved a 40-ton stone block using only Bronze Age technology. Wooden sledges, rope made from natural fibers, levers, and about 130 people pulling together. They didn't need aliens. They didn't need lost super technology. They needed patience, coordination, and understanding of basic physics. Other teams have gone even further. Researchers have moved 100-ton blocks using similar methods. Kind of stones you see at places like Baalbek or Stonehenge. The ones that make people say, that's impossible without modern machinery. Except it's not impossible. It's difficult. There's a difference. Think about it like this. Experimental archaeology is like studying a master carpenter's technique by attempting to build furniture yourself. You quickly realize that skill, practice, and traditional knowledge matter more than mysterious secrets. That perfectly fitted mortise and tenon joint? It looks like magic until you understand the technique. Then it's just extraordinarily well-executed craftsmanship. The same principle applies to ancient construction. We've learned so much from these experiments. About rope-making techniques that can handle enormous loads. About lever systems that multiply force in ways that seem almost elegant in their simplicity. About how teams coordinate massive efforts without modern communication technology. But here's what's honest. Some techniques remain unclear to us. Not because they were impossible. Not because they required supernatural help. But because we've lost certain cultural knowledge. The specific songs workers might have sung to keep rhythm while pulling ropes. The exact composition of lubricants used to reduce friction. The traditional training methods passed from master builders to apprentices over decades. It's like trying to recreate your grandmother's recipe when you've only got a partial ingredient list. You can get close. You can make something good. But you might be missing that one technique she learned from her grandmother, who learned it from hers. Take the Inca stone-fitting techniques at Sacsayhuaman. Those massive stones fit together so precisely you can't slide a knife blade between them. No mortar. Just stone on stone, fitted with incredible accuracy. Modern engineers are studying this, attempting to replicate it, and they're making progress. They figured out that it involves careful observation, patience, and a technique of repeatedly placing stones, marking high spots, removing them, grinding those spots down. Over and over. It's not a mystery. It's a craft that required an enormous amount of time and skill. What's remarkable is watching modern engineers' attitudes change as they attempt these replications. They start with a kind of casual confidence. Oh, we'll figure this out pretty quickly. Then they actually try moving a 50-ton stone with ropes and wooden rollers. Their respect for ancient builders grows with every meter they manage to move that stone. Because it's hard. Really hard. But not impossible. That's the honest truth experimental archaeology keeps revealing. Most ancient techniques are explainable with known technology and human capability. The key ingredient isn't mystery. It's dedication. Time. Skill passed through generations. Community effort on a scale we rarely see in our individualistic modern world. Something humbling about that, isn't it? We live in an age of power tools, computer-aided design, and massive machinery. We can do things quickly that would have taken ancient peoples years. But they could do things with patience and human coordination that we struggle to replicate even with our technology. They understood their materials intimately. They knew stone in a way we don't anymore. How it breaks, how it responds to heat and water, how to read its grain and structure. That knowledge was built over generations, refined through countless projects, passed down through apprenticeship and practice. We're rediscovering it now, piece by piece, experiment by experiment. And every successful recreation is a reminder. Not that ancient peoples were primitive, not that they needed help from advanced civilizations or beings, but that humans, working together with knowledge and determination, are capable of extraordinary things. Have you ever watched craftspeople work and realized their simple technique required years to master? That moment when you see someone do something that looks effortless, and you understand there's a lifetime of practice behind that gesture? That's what we're learning about ancient builders. Their techniques weren't simple. They were refined, sophisticated, the product of accumulated knowledge and patient mastery. And the best part, we're still learning. Every experiment teaches us something new. Every successful recreation adds another piece to our understanding. Not of lost mysteries, but of human capability, of what we can achieve when we combine knowledge, cooperation, and time. The experimental archaeologists are building a bridge between past and present, between wonder and understanding. They're showing us that the truth is magnificent enough. We don't need supernatural explanations. We just need to remember what humans are capable of when we work together.